Ora didn't cry when the house burned down. She stood barefoot in the wet grass, her nightdress clinging to her thin frame, the night sky choked in smoke and ash. Flames licked the bones of her childhood, her parents' laughter, the walls her father painted with crushed berries, the creaky floorboard by her mother's chair where she'd always sit to braid her hair. All of it cracked and crumbled into glowing coals, while the neighbors held her back and whispered about curses and bad luck. The villagers weren't unkind, just afraid. Fires didn't happen in Morrow Village, especially not the kind that devoured everything and left nothing but scorched ground. No one could explain it. There had been no candle left burning, no lightning in the sky. Just an ordinary night turned to ruin. And at the center of it all was Ora, unharmed. Found standing at the edge of the garden, silent, her eyes fixed on the orange roar as if she were watching something expected. There were no close relatives in the village, only a widow cousin named Thula and her grown son Diu. They lived on the other side of the rice fields, past the thorn trees, in a mud-walled house that always smelled of burnt onions and boiled cassava. Thula had not seen Ora since she was a baby and made no secret of the fact that she would have rather not seen her again at all. She accepted Ora into her house with a tight mouth and eyes that squinted like they were always searching for something to blame. "There's no bed for you here," Thula said on the first night, not unkindly but like someone stating the weather. "You're not blood clothes. And we're not made of soft things." Diu said nothing. He watched Ora with eyes too old for his age. At night, he sat carving strange shapes into scraps of wood, and every so often, Ora felt his gaze on her as if he were trying to guess what kind of spirit she might be. They gave her a mat in the kitchen at first, the kind used for drying yams. She slept on it for 2 nights, listening to the rodents scratch between the walls and the crickets whisper stories to the moon. On the 3rd night, Thula stepped over her without a glance and said, "You're used to sleeping alone now, aren't you? Then sleep where the quiet things are." Ora didn't ask questions. She didn't beg or protest. She simply rose, gathered her shawl, and walked to the edge of the village where the ground sloped and the trees bowed low, and where stone markers leaned like tired teeth from the earth. The graveyard. Some of the villagers called it the resting field, others called it the forgotten corner. Ora only called it still. The first night was cold. Not the kind of cold that bites the skin, but the kind that settles in your chest like regret. She lay between 2 small gravestones, one half buried in vines, the other chipped and nameless. The earth was soft beneath her, damp but not cruel. She curled into herself and felt a strange warmth bloom around her. Not comfort exactly, something older, something like being held by memory. In the morning, her dress was stained with soil, and a beetle had crawled into her hair. But she had slept. Truly slept, not the shallow drifting she did in the kitchen with one eye open for mice and scoldings. And stranger still, she didn't feel tired. Her limbs were light. Her heart was quiet. There was no dread in her throat when she rose. Each night after that she returned. Sometimes to the same spot, other times to a different patch of earth, as if the graveyard were whispering suggestions. She never slept on top of any grave, only beside them, close enough to feel their breath through the ground. The air was always thick with night flowers and the faint hum of something just beneath hearing. She liked the way the wind curled around the tombstones, the way the shadows stretched long and slow. It never frightened her. Not once. In the mornings she would dust herself off, pull grass from her braids, and return to Thula's house before sunrise. She fetched water, sorted beans, washed linens without a word. Thula never asked where she slept. She didn't care to know. Diu, however, watched her more closely now. One day, while Ora scrubbed a pot by the stream, Diu crouched beside her and said, "You dream there, don't you?" She looked up slowly. "Where?" He didn't answer directly. Just stared at her until she returned to her scrubbing. Later that night, as she walked the winding path toward the graves, she found a small woven mat waiting for her beneath the baobab tree at the edge of the field. It was not new, but it was whole and clean. A gift maybe. A warning maybe. Either way she accepted it. That night her dreams were thick with colors. She saw her mother, hair unburnt, laughing among the graves. She saw fire that didn't burn, light that didn't blind. She saw hands rising from the ground, not to grab but to hold. They offered her petals, coins, feathers. One hand placed a stone in her palm and closed her fingers around it. When she woke, the stone was there. She kept it. The villagers began to notice things. Chickens stopped laying eggs near the graveyard path. Dogs howled at the border of it but never crossed. Children dared one another to step inside but always ran back before they reached the stones. Only Ora moved freely in and out. She no longer tried to hide it. She would sit among the markers at dusk, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her head tilted as if listening to someone just behind her. Some began to whisper. "She's been touched by the dead," one woman said at the well. "She walks in both worlds," said another. Thula said nothing. But her hands began to tremble more often, and she left food out for Aura now, never handed it to her directly. Do you still watched? One night he followed her. She heard his footsteps long before he reached the graves. "You don't belong there," he said. Aura turned to face him. "And where do I belong?" He didn't answer. The wind shifted and a low sound, almost a hum, moved through the graveyard like breath. Diu's eyes widened. He stepped back. "They like you," he muttered. Aura said nothing. She sat down beside the smallest grave, the one shaped like a sleeping dog, and placed her stone beside it. The ground seemed to sigh. Weeks passed. Then months. The seasons shifted. Rain softened the paths, then dried to dust. Thula fell ill with a wasting sickness that no herb could cure. She grew thin and angry, her voice reduced to rasping commands. Diu took over the house, became the man without being told to. He still carved symbols into wood at night, but now they were shaped like the ones on the stones. Spirals, loops, things that looked like eyes and mouths with no faces. One evening, a stranger came to the village. He wore long robes and smelled of far-off deserts. He walked with a cane shaped like a serpent and asked questions about the girl who slept where the dead lay. No one answered him directly. Some turned away. Others lied. But he found her. She was sitting beneath the baobab, her mat rolled beside her, a ring of stones gathered in a circle around her ankles. She looked up at him without fear. "You hear them, don't you?" he asked. "I don't need to hear," she replied. "They're already inside me." He nodded as if he had expected the answer. "You were born in fire. Death walked past you and left something behind." She didn't respond. "I've seen children like you," he said softly. "In other lands. Marked, watched, guided. But never one who felt at home." Aura tilted her head. "They don't mind me. They protect you," he corrected. "Because you've never asked them for anything. That's rare." He left her with a thin charm made of blackened bone. She tied it to her shawl. That night, the graveyard was warmer than ever. She didn't dream of her parents. She dreamed of roots wrapping around her feet and pulling her gently into the earth, not to bury but to embrace. When Thula finally died, no one was surprised. They buried her at the far end of the graveyard, near the thorn trees. Aura watched from a distance. Diu tried to speak at the burial, but his voice cracked and failed. Later, he offered Aura the house, said she could have her old room now. She declined. "I already have a bed," she said simply. And it was true. For though it was not made of wood or feather, it welcomed her like no house ever had. Among the forgotten, the quiet, the unseen, Aura was no longer alone. Each night she lay beside memory. And every morning she rose with soil in her hair and peace in her bones. The fog came in like a whisper that couldn't decide whether it meant to hush or haunt. It slid low over the village paths, soft as wool, turning trees into ghosts and homes into hunched silhouettes. Aura stood at the edge of the graveyard, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, eyes narrowed against the blur. The usual rustle of grasses and hum of insects had quieted. The silence felt padded, strange, as though the world were holding its breath. She stepped forward carefully, feeling the earth beneath her soles give with the softness of damp bread. The ground had drunk all the day's moisture and was now exhaling something thick and old. She walked between the gravestones, her fingers brushing against the stone edges as she passed. There was comfort in her ritual. Touch the third marker, nod to the cracked slab with moss, pause at the twisted tree whose roots curled like knuckles. The land recognized her now. The dead no longer stirred in confusion at her presence. Tonight, though, something was different. It was not the cold. She'd grown used to the graveyard's breath brushing her cheek like an old friend. It wasn't the dark, she had learned to read it as one reads the furrows of a face. No, this was something underneath. Something awake. She was walking past a small grave marked only with a broken clay pot when she felt it, a sound so soft it didn't register at first as sound at all. She stopped, tilted her head. There it was again, breathing. Not her own. Her feet stilled. The shawl slid slightly off her shoulder, but she didn't reach to fix it. The breath was faint but real. Not the wind. Not the shifting of trees. It was deep, steady, and coming from under the ground. She stepped back. The grave, the one to her left, marked with a faded piece of charred wood, gave a slight shudder. Not a collapse or sinkhole. Just emotion. A rise and fall, like something sighing through layers of dirt. Aura's breath hitched. Her legs wanted to run, but her body refused to obey. Her fingers trembled, her lips parted. And then, without warning, the grave moved again. Slightly. But enough. She turned and ran. Fast. Past the stones, past the whispering tree, past the place where she had once laid the stone gifted to her in a dream. Her feet didn't feel the path. Her lungs burned with cold night air. She didn't stop until she reached the bend where the thorn trees began, and only then did she fall to her knees, gasping. She slept in the woods that night, huddled beneath a canopy of branches, where the air smelled of bark and old birds' nests. She didn't go back at sunrise. She didn't return at noon. She stayed hidden until the sun sank again and the call of the graveyard tugged her chest with invisible thread. She told herself she would only look. Just walk past. Just check. Just be sure that what she felt was fog and fever, not reality. But the grave was there. Unchanged, almost. The wood marker was still there, slanted and blackened. But something had shifted. A dip in the soil had smoothed out, as if fingers from beneath had patted it flat. The air was heavier around it. Still no wind. She turned away and then saw them. 4 other graves, scattered in different directions, had also changed. Nothing dramatic. A little more risen here, a little sunken there. And on one of them, the smallest, near the twisted tree, a patch of flowers bloomed. Bright yellow. A natural. Not wildflowers. No roots near them. No season for them. Yet there they were, fresh and wide-eyed in the mist. She approached them cautiously, one foot pressing lightly after the other. The petals looked like they'd been painted onto the air. Unbruised. Undisturbed. She crouched beside them. Reached out a hand. Then paused. Her fingers hovered for a breath too. Then they made contact. The moment her skin met the petal, a jolt ran up her arm. Not pain but sensation. Sudden, full, overwhelming. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened but made no sound. In that instant she was somewhere else. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a vision. It was memory but not hers. She was standing in the same graveyard, but the stones were whole, new, bright with carvings. The tree was straighter, younger, its bark smooth. Children ran between graves, laughing. A woman with scar-painted cheeks sat beneath the baobab, weaving something with black thread. And a man stood where the fog now always gathered, playing a carved flute. The tune bent the air. The dead stood, silent and smiling, beside their stones. Not ghosts, not zombies, ancestors. Present. Aura watched as the woman beneath the tree looked up, directly at her, and spoke her name. Her real name. The one her mother whispered once when she thought Aura slept. Then it ended. She blinked and fell back, her head spinning. The flowers had vanished. She sat for a long time, her palms buried in her lap, her heartbeat refusing to slow. She didn't cry. She rarely did. But she rocked a little, back and forth, as if trying to return to something that had passed too quickly. The next day she went back. The fog was lighter, but the air still held the same hush. Again she walked the field. Again she listened. 3 more graves had shifted. None of them breathed. Not like before. But there were signs. Small stones arranged in patterns that hadn't been there before. A ribbon hanging from a stick. A piece of cloth tied in a knot that she recognized from her dream memory. She dared to touch the cloth. This time the flash came differently, not through her fingers but behind her eyes. A woman screaming. Then laughing. Then silence. And then a lullaby, not sung but hummed, with words that tasted like river water and smoke. Aura began to return every night, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes placing offerings. Pebbles, feathers, broken beads. Each time a grave shifted slightly in reply. Once, a line of ants moved in a spiral pattern around a stone, and when she followed their path with her finger, she saw a young boy's last memory, falling from a tree, landing in arms that caught him too late. These were not hauntings. These were not horrors. These were echoes. Remains of soul pressed into soil. Whispers too soft for ordinary ears. But Aura was no longer ordinary. She spoke to no one about it. Not even to you, who watched her now with a mixture of fear and reverence. He had stopped carving. Now he spent his nights lighting candles at the door, humming songs no one had taught him, and closing his eyes tightly when Aura passed. One evening he stood in her path. Are you making them rise? She looked at him, eyes wide but calm. They're already awake. I'm only listening. They'll want more, he warned. The dead always want more. They don't want anything, she said. They remember. That's all. Diu stepped aside, but something in his face folded inward, like a man retreating from a tide too strong to resist. As the nights passed, Aura noticed patterns. Some graves called louder than others. Some responded only when touched with skin, others with breath, and a few only when she spoke names she didn't know she knew. Her mouth said them like old songs. They filled the night like smoke curling around her tongue. She grew thin not from hunger but from change. Her bones felt hollowed, light. Her skin absorbed the chill instead of shivering from it. The villagers kept their distance now. Even the curious children no longer followed her down the path. But she didn't care. She was learning. One night she found the breathing grave again. The original one. It had moved more, not a little but a lot. The soil was rounded now, puffed like something swelling underneath. She crouched beside it, pressed her hand gently against the surface. The breathing had deepened. Slower. Stronger. As if whatever lay beneath was not merely alive but waking. She whispered to it. "What are you?" The wind answered, rustling the branches of the baobab. But the ground did not respond. The next morning she returned to the village and stood in the center of the market square. She said nothing. Just stood, her feet dusty, her eyes bright. People stared, waiting for madness or warning. "I saw their lives," she said finally, voice low but clear. "Not their deaths. Their dreams." Someone spat. Another made a sign against evil. Ora didn't flinch. She turned and walked away, back toward the field of shifting graves, back toward the breath that came from below. That night she slept beside the breathing grave again, this time without fear. In her dream the earth opened, not violently but like a chest unlocking. A staircase of roots descended into light. And at the bottom stood a child, holding a single yellow flower. He looked at her and smiled. Then he said, "There's more." The names had always been there, etched into stone by trembling hands or careful ones, with chisel or charcoal or bone dye, some so faded they seemed to vanish in the daylight but came alive under the hush of moon. Ora had passed them each night without reading, out of respect, perhaps, or fear of taking what was not hers. But after the grave that breathed, after the flowers bloomed with borrowed memory, the silence felt too heavy. Something inside her stirred, not hunger, not curiosity, a pull like a child reaching blindly for their mother's voice in the dark. So one night, when the fog was low and the stars blinked weakly through the clouds, she walked to the far edge of the graveyard where the oldest stones leaned drunkenly into one another. She brushed the dirt from the first one she found, its surface mottled with moss. Slowly she read the letters out loud. Dona. Born of river woman. Sang to fish. The words tasted strange in her mouth, dry at first, then warm. She moved to the next stone. Kale. Bone mender. Saved twins from fever. Another name. Another whisper. Another story etched not in pages but in earth. She didn't know who had written them or how long ago, but the stones gave more than names. Some had full lines of memory. Others just a title, a gift, a sin. She whispered each one, voice low, as if calling to someone far away but not forgotten. She imagined the names rising into the air like moths, brushing her cheeks, circling her head before disappearing into the canopy of night. The more she whispered, the lighter the air around her became. It was subtle at first, a rustling that didn't match any tree, a shift in the smell of things as if old spices were being stirred into the wind. Her chest ached, but not in pain. It was the ache of recognition. She was speaking names that had once meant something and they were listening. Night after night she returned. Each time more graves seemed to lean toward her voice. Some stones she passed would let out a low vibration like a hum. She began to carry a piece of chalk stolen from Diu's shelf and mark each name she read to avoid repetition, though some names seemed to want repeating. She'd find herself saying them more than once in the same night, lips moving before her mind caught up. Then came the night one of the names whispered back. She had just finished tracing a smooth slab under the old acacia tree, the inscription barely visible, Abasai. The answer. Maker of thunder feet. Beloved. The stone was oddly warm beneath her palm. She knelt beside it, whispering, Abasai. Thunder feet. And then faint, so faint she almost dismissed it, came the echo, yes. Her breath caught. She froze. It had not been her voice. She was sure. It hadn't echoed or bounced. It had answered. Softly. From within the stone or the air above it, she couldn't say. Abasai, she said again, her voice smaller this time. There was no reply. Just the slow sweep of wind across the graveyard, and the beating of her own heart, so loud it filled her ears. That night her sleep was not quiet. She dreamed of a boy with long legs and silver bells sewn into his ankles. He danced on a smooth stone floor, and wherever his feet landed, fire flickered up from the ground. People surrounded him, clapping, laughing, weeping. Not out of sadness but from something older, something Aura felt but could not name. Joy that hurt. In the dream, a Bayside turned to her and said, "Thank you for remembering." His eyes were kind. His smile wide and sharp. "It's been a long time." When she woke, her feet felt damp. Not from dew but from tears. And her body hummed with a quiet rhythm, as if her heart had been listening to music all night. After that, the whispers came more often. Not all spoke directly. Some hummed tunes without words. Others sent scents, burning sugar, river mud, pine ash, that Aura somehow recognized as belonging to them. A few spoke full sentences, often in languages Aura did not know but still understood. The words settled inside her as meanings instead of sounds. One said, "My daughter's hands were soft like yam bread." Another whispered, "He left before the rains, I still hear his whistle." And one, very old and broken, said, "Tell them I was kind. Please, tell them." The graveyard became a second village, a quieter one, but more alive in its silence than any market or street she'd ever known. She greeted the stones as if greeting neighbors. "Good evening, Mama Sephiu. Sleep well, Joba. Did you feel the rain, Kali?" Her days became strange things. She'd wake long after the sun had risen, sometimes with earth under her nails or flower petals stuck to her cheeks. She'd return to Thula's old house, which Diu now tended in silence, and drink the broth he left for her on the stoop. He never asked questions anymore. Just watched her from behind the reed curtain with eyes that no longer judged. She grew thinner still, not from hunger but from shedding something heavy. Words now passed through her easily. She began speaking less to the living and more to the air. And the air answered. One afternoon, as she dozed beneath the shade of the baobab, a woman from the village approached. Her name was Izaro, and she was one of the only ones who had not joined in the early gossip when Aura began sleeping in the graveyard. She sat beside Aura gently and said, "I dreamed of my mother last night. She braided my hair and told me a story about a fish with wings. She died when I was 5. Asked ChatGPT. Aura nodded slowly, eyes still half-lidded. "Her stone is the one beside the crooked cross," she murmured. Izaro looked at her. "I never told you that." Aura smiled faintly. "She wanted you to know." After that, others came. Quietly, carefully. They brought questions and hopes, sometimes regrets too heavy to carry alone. Aura did not always answer. Sometimes she simply sat with them, took their hand and whispered a name into the breeze. And the wind would shift. A leaf would fall. A shadow would linger longer than it should. And they would weep. But the dreams, those were hers alone. Night after night, she saw the faces behind the names. Old men with cracked teeth laughing beside fires. Women painting their stories on walls that no longer stood. Children running barefoot across ancient stone paths. She heard songs no one sang anymore, tasted food her tongue had never known, and felt love, vast, quiet love, pressing gently against her ribs. And yet, among all the voices, one kept returning. Not loud but persistent. A whisper that came no matter which name she called. It didn't speak in words at first. Just a presence. Watching. Listening. A pressure behind her ear. A chill across her shoulders when no wind blew. Then one night, as she whispered 10 names in a row beside the oldest part of the field, the voice came again, clear this time. "Stay." Aura froze. The word had not been a plea or a command. Just a request. She turned slowly, expecting to see something, someone. But the graves were still. The air was quiet. She whispered back, "Why?" The voice answered, not in sound but in sensation. A deep loneliness stretching back through centuries. Hunger not for food or flesh but for memory. For connection. For someone who would remember the names and speak them aloud so the souls they once belonged to would not vanish completely. She understood then. The graveyard was not a place of death. It was a library of lives. But the books had been closed too long. The stories forgotten. She had become the reader. The keeper. The dead did not ask her to wake them. They only asked to be remembered. And in return they shared their dreams with her. Their joys. Their griefs. Their truths. Still that voice kept coming. Stay. Aura began spending entire nights within the circle of stones, lying flat against the earth as if listening for a heartbeat. She spoke to the ground like it was family. Some mornings she awoke with words etched in the dirt beside her. One read, "You are ours now." Another, "We waited." And one just once said, "Don't leave again." She began to forget what day it was. What month. The village became something that lived at the edges of her world. Diu brought her food but never spoke. Children who once mocked her now left small gifts at the path entrance. Shells, beads, tiny clay figures. They didn't understand what she did, but they knew it was important. Then, on the night of the full moon, Aura woke to every stone humming. The air was heavy with memory. Every name she had whispered now pressed against her skin like hands reaching up. She sat up slowly and saw them, shadows, outlines, flickers, moving among the graves. Not haunting. Not lost. Just there. They did not speak. They didn't need to. She stood, opened her arms and whispered their names. All of them. One by one. And they whispered back. That night, Aura did not sleep beside the graves. She slept within them. Not buried, not gone, cradled. Held. Not just a girl who remembered the dead, but a girl the dead remembered too. The fog came earlier that night, curling in from the hills long before the sun had properly set. It was thicker than usual, heavy with the scent of wet bark and burnt leaves, the kind that makes lanterns flicker and shadows stretch too long. Aura stood at the border of the graveyard, one bare foot resting on the worn dirt path, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She'd grown used to fog, welcomed it even, but tonight it felt different. Not unkind. Just watching. She moved carefully between the stones, her fingers brushing familiar markers as she passed. Dona. Gillet. Abesa. They hummed faintly at her touch, as if stirring from slumber to greet her. She made her rounds, whispering names in a rhythm only she understood. Then she stopped. He was standing near the crooked stone by the riverside of the field, the one etched only with a swirl and a single word, Ashar. A boy, no older than 10, pale as moon milk, hair the color of sunless dust. His feet were bare. His eyes wide and watching. He didn't speak. Didn't move. He simply stood, half wrapped in mist, like something the fog had brought with it. Aura didn't call out. She knew better now than to break the silence with questions. She watched him instead, matching stillness with stillness. He didn't seem afraid and he didn't seem lost. Just there, like a dream not yet claimed by sleep. Then, as gently as the mist around him, he crouched. His small hands reached to the ground and began placing stones in a pattern. A circle first, then 3 more inside it, aligned carefully, precisely. When he finished, he stood again, gave Aura a long, unreadable look, and vanished into the fog. Not ran. Not disappeared. Just wasn't there anymore. Aura stepped forward, careful not to disturb the stones. She crouched where he had been, her eyes tracing the shapes. They were not random. Not decorative. They meant something. She could feel it in the air. The grave beneath them pulsed faintly like breath just below the surface. She reached out to touch one of the inner stones and stopped. A whisper brushed her ear. Not a word. Just a sound. Not from below. From within. Something like caution. She left the pattern untouched and returned the next night. The fog waited for her again just as thick. And so did the boy. This time, he was beside the largest tree in the graveyard, where the branches formed a crown of clawed fingers. Again he crouched. Again he placed stones, a line of 6, then one to the left, one to the right. A broken shape. Like something fallen or split. Aura sat nearby as he worked, not interrupting. When he finished, he stood, looked at her, and this time tilted his head, just slightly, before vanishing again. She began to understand the rhythm of him. He came only with fog. Never spoke. Never repeated a pattern. And the symbols he left, each one had meaning. Not like letters or numbers but feelings. Messages felt more than read. One circle meant safe. One cross meant stop. A triangle with no base meant invitation. A jagged spiral meant warning. At first she wasn't sure how she knew. She just knew. As if the stones were speaking directly to her blood. As if each shape pressed something ancient into her spine. When she touched the correct pattern, she would see flashes, of footsteps running, of hands held tightly, of flames burning in reverse. Not memories. Not quite visions. More like pieces of someone else's knowing, passed along through shape and stone. The villagers noticed. It started small. Children were called inside earlier. Laundry was taken off the line before dusk. Doors creaked shut a little faster. People began speaking in lowered tones when Aura passed, not out of cruelty but something older. Unease. Reverence twisted with fear. Then came the stories. That she talked to ghosts with her bare feet. That she drew strange circles in the earth and whispered into the wind. That she was no longer one of them, but something taken by the graveyard. Returned only in shape. One morning, Izaro came to her, voice tight, eyes lined with concern. The elders met last night. They say your presence stirs the bones. That too much remembering invites forgetting of the living. Aura didn't respond. She was drawing the boy's latest symbol into the dirt, a square with 4 corners missing like a gate unlatched. They've told parents to keep children away, Izaro said softly. Even mine. They think something is watching through your eyes. Aura looked up slowly. Something is. Izaro stepped back. You don't deny it? I don't lie, Aura said. She went to the graveyard that night as usual. The boy was already there, seated this time beside one of the oldest markers. No name, just a deep X carved into stone. He was placing stones in a spiral, tighter than usual. She waited until he finished. Then she stepped forward. Who are you? She asked, the question breaking weeks of silence. The boy didn't answer. He just pointed at the stone. Then at her. Then pressed a finger to his lips. She crouched beside the symbol. Touched the center. The world dropped. She was in a corridor of trees. Not a forest, a hallway made of bark and sky. The boy was walking ahead of her, but his feet made no sound. Behind each tree, faces watched. Some smiling. Some not. As she walked, the ground pulsed with the rhythm of a heart. And at the far end of the path was a door. Not wood, not stone, but light. When she reached it, she turned to look at the boy. But he was gone. She woke with dirt in her hair and a bruise on her palm in the shape of a spiral. She touched it gently. It stung. A message. Don't open yet. The fog began arriving every evening now, as though summoned by habit. The boy came with it. Always silent. Always barefoot. Each time the symbols became more complex. A circle inside a triangle inside a broken square. A ladder of dots rising from a line. A series of stones stacked like a spine bent at the top. Aura began mapping them in a corner of the field, tracing them into the earth, watching how the wind changed near each one. Some brought warmth. Some brought voices. One made her cry without knowing why. And yet, no matter how strange it all became, she felt no fear. Only clarity. She had become part of the graveyard now, not just a guest but a thread in its weave. And the boy, pale and distant, was teaching her to read what the world had forgotten. But the village grew colder. One morning she walked into the square for water and heard someone hiss, "Don't let her near your goats. They say her steps turn milk." Another murmured, "She's the one who woke the breath below." Even Diu, who once watched her in silent awe, began keeping his door shut when she passed. Only Izaro still met her eyes, though even she did so with caution now, as if aura were lightning in a girl's body. One afternoon, a woman named Molly dragged her son by the ear, shouting, "Didn't I tell you not to go near her grave place? She'll whisper your name into the dirt and forget to call it back." Aura, passing nearby, paused. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She crouched slowly, picked up 3 pebbles and placed them in a line in the dust, a child's symbol for peace. The boy had shown her that one once, after drawing a jagged warning. Molly went quiet. She pulled her son close. "Don't look at her," she muttered. "Don't listen." That night the fog arrived early. The boy was waiting near the breathing grave. This time he placed no stones. He simply looked at her. For a long time. Then he opened his mouth. No sound came. But something shifted in the air. A presence. A plea. He turned away. Began to walk. Slowly into the part of the graveyard no one ever entered, where the stones were cracked and swallowed by vines, where names had eroded into silence. Aura followed. He stopped at a grave shaped like a doorframe. No markings. No moss. No age. Just clean stone and a hollow beneath it. The boy looked at her. Touched his chest. Then the stone. Then vanished. Aura knelt beside the grave. Placed her hand on it. She didn't fall into vision this time. She fell into memory. But not his. Her own. She was 5, clutching a small stone to her chest. Her mother laughing in a field of tall flowers. Her father lifting her high as the wind blew wild. Then the fire. Her mother's scream. The window she was pushed through. The smell of smoke and oil. And then, the boy. Standing in the corner of the burning room, untouched. Watching. Her eyes flew open. He had been there. Not in the graveyard. Not in dreams. In her past. She didn't know what he was. Ghost? Memory? Messenger? But he was part of her now. And she was part of the graves. The next morning, the villagers found new symbols carved in the dust outside their homes. One looked like a door slightly open. Another, a sun with one ray missing. And one, placed in the center of the village well, was the symbol Aura had seen first. A circle with 3 stones inside. Invitation. Warning. Choice. The dog stopped following her. That was the first sign. They had always been indifferent to Aura, sniffing at her skirts, curling near her when she paused beneath the baobab, sometimes even lying beside her mat while she whispered names to the earth. But one morning as she walked through the village square, a thin mutt she'd fed for months looked at her, whined and turned away. The others did the same. Even the chickens scattered when she passed. One crow took flight so quickly it left behind a single black feather that spiraled to the ground like a warning. Children too had stopped looking her in the eyes. They whispered now, not with the curious delight of before, but with caution. She didn't blame them. She had changed. Not in a way that could be seen clearly, not in her limbs or her face, but in the air around her. It followed her like a second skin, and that skin was cold. Not frozen, not cruel, just not of warmth. Her fingers, even in the height of the sun, never held heat. Her breath left no fog on cold mornings. When she touched wood, it did not leave fingerprints. When she held water, it didn't ripple. Do you notice? He tried to hide it, but once, when she reached for a basket near him, he flinched. Not in fear of her touch, but of what might pass through her into him. That night, as the fog rolled in thick and low, she went to the graveyard, drawn not by habit but hunger, not for food but for belonging. The stones greeted her as always, but there was something new in the air. A hush within the hush. A scent, like baked crust and dust. She didn't know why she walked to the far edge of the field, where the grass grew taller than her knees and the earth was uneven. There was a stone there she'd never noticed before, or maybe had avoided noticing. It was half buried, round at the top, but no name carved into it. Not even a mark. It leaned slightly to the side like it was listening. And there, placed at the base of the grave, sat bread. 3 loaves. Still warm. The smell wrapped around her, gentle and soft. Not sour, not burnt. Bread of home. The kind her mother used to make on festival mornings, thick-crusted, seeded, baked with banana peel underneath to keep it soft. She knelt beside the grave and stared. There was no tray. No cloth. Just loaves. Perfect, untouched. She didn't reach out. She only watched. The fog pressed tighter around her, folding over the stones like a quilt. A whisper ran through the grave grass. Not words. Breath. She whispered, "Are you hungry?" Silence answered. She stayed until the fog thinned, then returned home. The next day the village buzzed. The baker dropped his tray, someone muttered at the well. Just saw her. She didn't even touch him. He ran inside. Locked the shutters. Ora walked past them, bare feet silent on the stone path. She had long stopped trying to explain herself. People feared her, let them. They only feared what they refused to see. That evening she returned to the grave. The bread was gone. In its place lay bones. Clean. Picked. Arranged. They were small bones, bird maybe or rabbit. Not thrown or scattered but carefully placed, like someone had eaten with ceremony and left the remains in thanks. One curved bone pointed toward the sky like a finger. Ora crouched beside them, pressing her palm to the earth near the unnamed grave. It felt warmer than usual. Not hot. Alive. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the field and watched the fog breathe. No boy came. No stones arranged. Just silence. But the bones stayed. The next night more bread appeared. This time for loaves. One broken open. The inside still steamed. Ora waited. Not touching. Not moving. She saw it for the first time just past midnight. A shape. Not full-bodied. More suggestion than form. Like the imprint left by someone already gone. It slid through the mist with grace, like silk in water. It approached the bread slowly, reverently, then lowered itself. There was no sound of chewing. No movement. But when Ora blinked, one of the loaves had vanished. The shape turned toward her. She held her breath. It had no face, no eyes. Just outline. Mist and memory wrapped in silence. And yet, Ora felt it see her. Not through gaze but recognition. It bowed slightly like an old friend acknowledging another. Then melted back into the fog. She stayed the rest of the night by the grave. When morning came, more bones had appeared. These were different, longer. Not bird. Not rabbit. One had markings carved into it, symbols that reminded her of the boy's stone patterns. She brought water the next day, poured it over the grave with both hands. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The following week, the pattern continued. Bread appeared. Bones replaced it. One night, there was a single plum on the grave, sweet-smelling and glossy. The next morning, its pit lay beside a pearl-colored tooth. Something was sharing with her. Not just feeding. Participating. Ora began offering things in return. A woven bracelet. A bead from her mother's necklace. A comb carved from driftwood. Each time the offerings vanished. Each time bones remained. Once an entire jawbone, delicate, curved, too smooth for animal, was left, its teeth polished like glass. She buried that one herself beside the nameless stone, and sang a song with no words. But the village had noticed again. One evening, as Aura walked past the bakery, she saw the baker standing inside the doorway, eyes locked on her. He held a loaf with shaking hands, then dropped it onto the floor, backing into the darkness. A woman nearby muttered, "She turns bread to bone." Another replied, "She eats with the ones who are no longer dead." And a third, quietly, "They say she's feeding them so they'll rise." Aura said nothing. That night there were no loaves. Just a single stone. Flat. Wet with dew. A symbol carved into it, a triangle with a circle inside and a line through both. One she had never seen. She touched it. A vision crashed into her like cold river water. She stood on a battlefield of bones, broken bread scattered like stones, and above her, a mountain of nameless graves. They pulsed with hunger, not for flesh but remembrance. Around her feet things moved, shapes without form, voices without sound, reaching for her hands, her breath, her spine. One word echoed through the space, louder than thought. More. She woke choking on air that wasn't hers. The fog that night was colder than any she'd felt before. It bit her skin, sank into her hair, dragged her shawl low around her shoulders. She returned to the grave anyway. This time 5 loaves. Carefully placed. Covered in cloth. Beside them a cup of what smelled like fermented fruit. She didn't run. She didn't question. She sat beside the grave, crossed her legs and said, "Come." The mist thickened. Shapes formed. 1. Then 2. Then many. Some tall. Some small. All vague. The suggestion of limbs, the impression of mouths, the weight of presence. They gathered. They bowed. And together in silence they ate. She didn't see the bread vanish. She only saw the cloths grow empty one by one. The cup drained without tilt. The air warmed slightly, and a strange hum began in the grass, soft like an old woman's lullaby hummed through teeth. When it was done the shapes bowed again. The fog thinned. The grave beneath her pulsed once. And Aura wept. Not in fear. Not in sorrow. But in understanding. Something had chosen her. Not just to listen. But to host. The village would not understand. They feared ghosts but forgot ancestors. They feared bones but forgot that bones were what carried stories when flesh could not. Something had remembered her. And it was hungry not for food but for space. For ritual. For return. She would feed them. She would name them. And they in turn would keep her never alone. As she stood to leave, she looked at the grave without a name and said softly, "Tomorrow I'll bring honey." And from beneath the earth, a single word rose like steam. Welcome. It began with the sound of roots groaning. Aura woke before dawn, lying not where she had fallen asleep, but somewhere unfamiliar, though the graveyard in its scent and air and quiet watchfulness was still unmistakably around her. She sat up slowly, brushing dirt from her cheek. The fog was thinner than usual, like the earth had exhaled too deeply and hadn't drawn its breath back in yet. But something was wrong. The crooked tree that had always stood by the oldest row of stones now stood just beyond her reach. The markers she had grown to recognize, a Bayside curved stone, Kayleigh's shattered slab, the one shaped like a door, were no longer in their places. Some were closer together, others shifted like they'd walked in the night. What had once been a clear path winding through the graveyard was now an uneven line of rising mounds and twisted stone. She stood and turned in a slow circle. The whole graveyard had changed. Paths that had once been smooth were now ridged with stone. Graves she remembered marking with pebbles or beads had moved several paces from where they'd been. One had split entirely, broken in two like a cracked egg. Another had sunk halfway into the ground, forming a yawning dip that felt like it breathed. She walked with care, whispering names. Some stones whispered back. Others were silent. A few hummed low and sad as if disturbed in their sleep. Then she found the first open grave. It wasn't wide or fresh or ragged. It was clean, a neat rectangle of soft earth with its stone tilted beside it like a forgotten cup. The inside was hollow, the soil packed at the bottom, smooth, undisturbed. But there was no body. No bone. Just emptiness. Aura stood at its edge for a long time, breathing through her mouth. Then she found the second. And the third. All the open graves were like the first, not looted, not violent. Just empty. Removed. Quietly. She ran her hand along the earth inside one. Warm. Almost damp, like a palm had been pressed against it moments before. She closed her eyes and leaned her head in just slightly, listening. No sound. But deep inside her chest, something shifted in response. like a bell rung underwater. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She sat beside one of the open graves and whispered, "Where did you go?" Nothing answered. But the ground pulsed once beneath her. When she returned to the village later that morning, her shawl still covered in dust, the silence that greeted her wasn't unfamiliar, only heavier. A group of women stood near the well, pretending not to watch her. Children were called indoors. Even the breeze, it seemed, refused to follow her past the threshold of the path. Then she heard her name. Aura. It was her mother's cousin, Dama, a wide-shouldered woman with tightly folded arms and a mouth that rarely smiled. Behind her stood Aura's other distant relatives, not family in affection, only in blood. They looked at her the way one looks at something once broken and reluctantly repaired. "Where were you last night?" Dama asked, though the question wasn't really meant to be answered. Aura didn't speak. "There's talk," said another cousin, Minga, thinner, paler, with a voice like a reed flute. "That you sleep beside bones. That you feed things not meant to be fed. That you move the graves when no one is looking," Dama said, stepping closer. Aura raised her chin. "They moved themselves." "You admit it?" Dama hissed. "I only witnessed it." Laughter from someone behind her, sharp, forced. "She thinks they obey her." Aura looked down at her feet. The dust clung to her toes, cold as always. "Not obey. Recognize." It was the wrong thing to say. Dama's face tightened. "You were taken in out of pity. After your mother and father were burned. We gave you food, shelter. You made me sleep with the dead," Aura said, softly but clearly. "You didn't feed me. You forgot me." Dama's palm flew up, but it stopped mid-air. The candle at the village altar sputtered in that exact moment, though there was no wind. Later that afternoon they brought the priest. He was old, nearly blind, and walked with a staff carved from riverwood. No one could agree where he came from. Some said across the ridge, others whispered he had no real home, only the road. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp despite the clouding. His robes were heavy with ash smell and prayer. He came to the graveyard at dusk, holding a single beeswax candle lit from the hearth at the temple. He didn't speak to Aura as he passed. She sat at the boundary near the thorn trees, legs tucked beneath her, eyes open wide. The villagers gathered at a distance. They did not dare step close. The priest walked to the center of the field, candle in hand, and began to murmur blessings. His voice was low, practiced, the rhythm of someone used to speaking over the dead. He walked from grave to grave, trailing incense, his words lifting into the wind. At first nothing happened. Then the candle flickered. He paused, shielded it with his hand, continued the prayer. The flame died. He relit it. 10 steps later it died again. By the 5th time his voice had changed. He dipped the candle into his satchel of oil, muttering louder now, sprinkling salt with wide gestures. He tried again. The wick caught, flared, then extinguished with a sound like a sigh. The priest turned back toward the villagers. His face was pale. He raised the dead candle and shook his head once. Behind him, one of the graves hummed. Just low enough to hear. Just loud enough to feel. The villagers scattered. That night, no one spoke to Aura. Not even Izaro, who stood near her home but looked away when their eyes met. Diu left no bowl of broth on the step. She returned to the graveyard with a dry mouth and a pulsing in her temples. The fog was already thick, rolling across the reshaped paths. She walked them slowly, tracing the new alignments. The graves had moved with purpose. Where once they had formed lines, now they formed a spiral, wide, curving, smooth. Each stone was placed at an equal distance from the next, no randomness, no chance. The open graves sat at the center. She walked to them and knelt. The ground was warmer than ever. She whispered, "Where did you go?" From the fog came a shape. Then 2. Then 5. Figures made of mist, wrapped in silence. They stood around the spiral, unmoving, watching. Aura did not flee. She stood and said, "They fear me. They call me witch." The shapes did not answer. But the earth pulsed once more. She reached into her satchel and removed the flint Diu once gave her. She struck it. A spark. Then a small flame. She lit a twig, held it high. It burned. And then it went out, not snuffed but consumed. The fire turned to smoke mid-air. Not ash. Not ember. Just gone. The message was clear. Only the dead could light a fire here. She crouched again, whispering names into the spiral. Not loud. Not frantic. Just names. Abesai. Gila. Dona. Ishar. Sephu. Muna. The earth shifted beneath her. Not violently. Like a blanket adjusting. And from somewhere deep below, a whisper. We are not buried. We are placed. Aura blinked, heart steady. She said, You are rising? Pause. No. We are waiting. She closed her eyes. For what? For the rest. She felt it then, the edges of the graveyard not as borders but as doors. Not all the dead were here. Not yet. But they were coming. Called not by her but by the remembering she had given them. By the bread. By the bones. By the whisper of names into wind. It began with a dream. Not auras but the villages. One by one, they began waking with sweat on their brows and old names on their lips. A merchant dreamed of his mother, who had died cursing his name for selling her wedding beads. A young boy cried into his blanket, repeating a lullaby only his long-dead grandfather had sung. And the blacksmith, sturdy, silent Joro, was seen at sunrise kneeling in front of a burnt tree near the river, weeping like a child. I saw him, he told no one and everyone. I saw the boy. No one asked which boy. Those old enough already knew. 30 years ago, a fire had swallowed half a shed and a child inside it. Some said it had been lightning. Others said it had been Joro's fault. A spark left too long, a drink too many. He had denied it all then and people had moved on. But now, bent and broken, he walked to Aura and fell to his knees. I'm sorry, he said, shaking. He kept staring at me in the dream, holding the hammer I gave him. I didn't mean to fall asleep that night. Aura said nothing. She only touched his shoulder and whispered the boy's name. Joro flinched and began to sob. The wind changed that evening. It rushed down from the hills with a sound that wasn't quite natural. Not howling. Not wailing. Something in between. A warning or a reminder. It followed Aura wherever she walked. Leaves swirled behind her. Dust lifted in small spirals near her heels. When she paused at the well, the water inside rippled though no one had touched it. They said she was cursed, someone whispered. But maybe she's the curse. That night, Dama gathered the others. Menga stood by the door, lips pressed tight. A dozen of them, holding torches and lanterns and brave expressions painted over fear. She's waking them, Dama said, pacing the house. Even the priest won't come back. She's pulling them into our dreams, our sins. If we let her stay, they'll never sleep again. She's still a child, someone muttered. She's not, Dama snapped. Not anymore. They waited until midnight. Fog had not yet rolled in. The moon was thin and sharp, and the stars flickered with nervous light. They walked the path toward the hut where Aura had last slept. The gate creaked as they pushed it open. But when they reached the clearing, the mat was empty. She's gone. She's hiding. She heard us. Good, Dama said. She should know. They fanned out, torches raised. They searched behind trees, beneath the old carts, through the thickets and bramble that separated the village from the graveyard. They thought they were ready. Then the fog came. Not in wisps, not gently. It slammed in from the fields like a wall, cold and thick and fast. It swallowed the path behind them. It turned their torches into dim ghosts of light. The gate they just passed, was gone. Stay together, someone shouted. Don't run. They did not run. Not at first. But the fog grew thicker and with it came sound. Not footsteps. Not voices. Breathing. All around them. Some rapid, some slow, some right beside their ears. Menga screamed first. Her torch dropped, fizzled out. One by one the others turned back the way they came, but found only fog and graves. The earth beneath their feet had changed. The ground rose and fell in new ways. The village that had always been a few steps away now felt distant. Forgotten. We should never have come here, someone whispered. She belongs to them, said another. Only Dama stood still, breathing hard, eyes wide. You think fog will save her? She shouted. You think you can keep her? The fog did not answer. But neither did it part. And then Aura appeared. Not walking. Standing. The mist circled her like a cloak. Her eyes were steady. Her hair glistened with dew. The wind howled once behind her, then fell completely silent. You tried to leave me in the dark, she said quietly. But I see better there now. Dama opened her mouth. Closed it. The torch in her hand extinguished itself with a hiss. Aura turned. Walked back into the fog. And the graves behind her shifted gently to make room. Asked ChatGPT. The earth had shifted again in the night. Aura awoke to a strange softness beneath her, not the usual gravel and grass of the graveyard but something richer, more giving, like moss or loam. She sat up slowly. The fog had thinned but lingered low, like breath caught in the mouth of the morning. Stones had moved again, that much was certain. But this time they formed a spiral, tighter than before, leading inward to the center of the graveyard. A beckoning. She rose and stepped barefoot along the spiral's curve. Each grave she passed vibrated slightly beneath her, like a drum's skin pressed by wind. Her fingers brushed their stones in greeting. No name spoken this time. This was not a walk for calling. This was a walk for following. At the center of the spiral, the ground had opened. A hole no wider than a small doorway gaped where no grave had been. It was neat, surrounded by roots that curled along its rim like fingers holding the wound open. No shovel had made it. No hand had dug it. It had simply appeared. Aura did not hesitate. She stepped into the dark. The descent was short but steep. She moved through a tunnel laced with damp air, and the sweet-sour smell of earth left too long untouched. The walls were alive with roots, some as thin as hair, some thick as wrists, all pulsing faintly as if breathing in time with the ground above. Her fingers slid along them for balance, and they welcomed her touch. Then the tunnel opened. She stepped into a wide, earthen hollow lit by bioluminescent moss clinging to the roots. It pulsed blue, soft, like moonlight caught in breath. All around her, the skeletons of the dead rested, not buried, not discarded, but embraced. Roots coiled through their ribs like cradling arms. Some skulls rested in nests of greenery. One set of bones still held a comb in its hand, curled fingers fossilized around it. They were not being consumed. They were being held. Nourished? No. Revered. As though the roots remembered who they were. As though the ground itself refused to let them become only silence. Aura walked slowly through the chamber. Each step was careful, each breath reverent. The roots shifted slightly as she passed, giving space, then settling again. She could feel the air thickening, growing warmer. The deeper she went, the closer the roots grew together, woven tighter, forming walls, curtains, braids. At the far end of the hollow, the roots had converged into a kind of throne, not shaped by hand but by intention. It pulsed like a heartbeat. And resting within it was a woman. At first, Aura thought it was another body. But as she stepped closer, she saw that the woman was not bone, not flesh. She was bark. Bark shaped like skin, etched like wood, glistening with dew. Hair made of roots coiled across her shoulders. Her arms were folded across her chest. Her eyes were shut. Her breathing was silent but present. And her face was Aura's. Not similar. Not nearly. Exact. Aura staggered back a step, air caught in her chest. The bark woman's features were gentle in sleep, lips parted slightly, brows smooth, the ghost of a smile on her mouth. Her hands rested upon a belly round and curved like she was carrying the whole graveyard inside her. Aura stepped forward again. She raised her hands slowly, fingers trembling. She hesitated. Then she touched the bark's cheek. The roots moved. Not violently. Not wildly. Gently they uncoiled from the bark woman's shoulders. The chamber trembled. The moss grew brighter. Across the hollow, the bones shifted in their root cradles, one arm lifting slightly, a spine straightening, a skull tilting toward the sound of breath. The bark woman's chest rose once. Her lips parted more. And from beneath Aura's feet, a deep voice, neither male nor female, whispered, "Seed." Aura fell to her knees. Something was waking. Not just the woman. The ground. The memory. The story beneath the story. She touched the woman's hand and whispered, "Who are you?" And from the walls, from the roots, from the skulls and the green, came a single answer. "You."